Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and cats? That's right, you're about to take a nap in the cozy embrace of ancient Egypt, where cats weren't just household pets, they were something much more mysterious. Imagine this, you're walking along the busy streets of a bustling Egyptian city, the heat of the sun shimmering off the stone walls, and everywhere you look, there's a cat, strutting with an air of importance. But this isn't just any cat. No, these felines had serious business, especially when it came to solving crimes. You probably won't survive this ancient setting, though, who could? You'd be too busy bowing to the cats, who were believed to possess powers far beyond anything you can imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far my voice travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the ancient world, you'd be hard-pressed to find a place where cats didn't rule, whether in the bustling marketplaces or inside the grand temples of Egypt. Cats weren't just cute companions, they were revered, protected, and even employed in crime-solving. Their mysterious, silent movements made them the perfect candidates for the job. The Egyptian belief that cats were connected to the divine was more than just superstition, it shaped much of their legal system. And, believe it or not, some ancient records suggest that cats were brought in as key players in the criminal justice system. If you were a suspect in a serious crime, you might find yourself facing not just a pharaoh's decree, but a judgment that involved a cat. Yes, really. Historians still debate whether this idea of cats as detectives is real or just a clever exaggeration, but the fact that these creatures were so intertwined with justice is absolutely fascinating. Now, as we stroll through ancient Egyptian streets, think of the cats with a different perspective. Not only were they divine symbols, but their role in Egyptian society extended far beyond the casual lap cat. They had a mystical aura, one that made them perfect for settling disputes, even when the crime was something as serious as murder. Just imagine the scene, you're in a court where a cat is sitting solemnly, watching, perhaps even playing a role in helping to determine the verdict. It sounds like something straight out of a mystery novel, doesn't it? As you continue on this journey through ancient Egypt, let's delve deeper into the divine power of cats. You see, Egyptians didn't just think of cats as adorable, fluffy creatures, they were revered as almost godlike beings, carrying the weight of sacred symbolism wherever they went. Cats were the embodiment of protection, grace, and mystery. Their sleek movements, sharp eyes, and innate ability to navigate the world with an air of confidence made them seem almost magical. It was no surprise that the ancient Egyptians associated cats with their most powerful goddess, Batet. She was the feline deity of home, fertility, and most notably, protection. Her protective qualities weren't just limited to the home, she was seen as a fierce defender, not unlike the cats she represented. You can almost feel the soft breeze of Egypt's desert winds as you picture Batet, with her half-human, half-cat form, standing tall. She would often be depicted as a lioness or with a cat's head, symbolizing strength and compassion in one striking image. Ancient Egyptians believed that cats embodied Bastet's divine nature. So, when a cat wandered through an Egyptian household, it wasn't just any cat, it was seen as a small avatar of the goddess herself, bringing a bit of divine protection along for the ride. No wonder Egyptians went to such great lengths to protect their cats. Imagine this, you could lose your property or your life for causing harm to a cat. A mere scratch to one could result in a severe penalty, as cats were believed to bring divine wrath upon those who disrespected them. Historians still argue whether these laws were taken to extremes or if they were simply a reflection of how sacred cats were in the culture. The bond between Egyptians and their feline companions wasn't just about superstition, it was practical, too. Cats helped to keep homes free of pests, making them incredibly valuable in an agricultural society. But beyond their role in pest control, they were thought to possess an ability to detect danger. This made cats not only protectors of the home but also keepers of justice. If a crime were committed, the suspicion would fall on the criminal, perhaps right in front of a vigilant cat. Cats were seen as capable of sensing guilt, and there's evidence suggesting that they played a unique role in the way disputes and crimes were handled. Of course, no one can say for sure whether a cat's mere presence in a courtroom actually influenced the outcome of a trial, but the belief was deeply rooted in Egyptian culture. The idea that a cat could discern truth from lies, or guilt from innocence, became a powerful symbol of the divine intervention that could tip the scales of justice. It's almost as if the cats were acting as silent, furry judges, their sharp eyes watching every move with a knowing gaze. In a way, they became arbiters of not just the home, but of the very social order itself. Whether or not a cat ever physically interacted with a crime scene, its role in the Egyptian imagination was clear. They were the impartial observers, the final sign-off on a person's fate. If you're ever in doubt about how seriously Egyptians took their cats, just imagine being in a courtroom where the fate of a criminal could rest in the eyes of a cat. It seems absurd, yet it was a reality in ancient Egypt. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the role of Batet in Egyptian justice and how this connection to cats shaped the way society viewed crime and punishment. You might be thinking, okay, cats as protectors, that's cute, but how do they factor into solving real crimes? Well, here's where things get even more intriguing. Batet wasn't just about cuddles and playtime. As a goddess of war and protection, her powers extended to protecting society from wrongdoers, ensuring that the forces of justice prevailed. Batet was seen as a fierce warrior goddess, a lioness in a gentle, feline form. And just as a lioness would defend her cubs from danger, Batet was believed to defend her people from evil. So, when crimes occurred, especially those of a serious nature, Egyptians didn't just rely on their pharaohs or judges for decisions, they invoked the presence of cats as divine mediators. Let's step back for a moment. Picture the scene, an ancient courtroom, with a crowd gathered, the murmurs of hushed voices floating in the air. There's a sense of anticipation, an almost tangible tension. The defendant stands before a judge, ready to face accusations of theft or even murder. And sitting silently in the corner, perhaps curled up in a sunbeam or perched atop a pillar, is a cat. To the untrained eye, it might seem like just another feline lounging around, but to the Egyptians, it was so much more than that. This cat was a link to Batet herself, and its gaze was said to hold immense weight. Historians still argue whether cats' mere presence had a legal effect, but the fact remains that cats were believed to possess a certain authority over justice. They symbolized the impartial eye of the goddess watching over the proceedings. There's a curious theory that cats might have been more than just symbolic in this regard. Some believe that in ancient times, cats were actually employed to judge certain cases. How, you ask? Well, in a society where religion and the supernatural were deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life, the line between myth and reality could often blur. Cats, with their serene and mysterious nature, were believed to be able to sense things that mere humans could not. Some sources suggest that a cat might have been involved in something resembling a crime scene investigation, observing the guilty party with its sharp eyes, perhaps even reacting to certain cues. Picture this, a thief caught red-handed, his fate hanging in the balance. The cat watches closely, its eyes never leaving the accused. Some believed that if the cat paid no attention to the individual, it was a sign of innocence. However, if the cat fixed its gaze and gave a sharp meow, the accused was thought to be guilty. This, of course, is where the line between historical fact and legend gets a bit hazy. But the idea that these cats were considered arbiters of justice paints a picture of how deeply ingrained they were in Egyptian culture. It's easy to imagine the tension in these courtrooms, the hushed whispers as all eyes turned not just to the judge, but to the cat. Was it the feline's power, or was it simply the belief in the supernatural that made its presence so important? Either way, the connection between cats and Egyptian justice is undeniable. As we move forward in time, we'll continue to explore how these sacred creatures were seen not just as symbols, but as active players in the way society viewed crime, guilt, and punishment. Now that we've established how deeply embedded cats were in the justice system, let's take a closer look at the most fascinating and possibly exaggerated aspect of their involvement, the idea of cats as detectives in their own right. Imagine this: a crime has occurred, and the ancient Egyptians, relying heavily on their religious beliefs and divine interventions, would look to their cats for guidance. Cats were so intertwined with the divine and supernatural that it was believed they could somehow sense the truth of a situation, acting as a silent, furry observer. But did they really have a role in solving crimes, or is this just a story crafted by storytellers and priests to enhance the mysterious aura of these revered creatures? Historians still debate this. Some believe cats were nothing more than a symbol of judgment, while others think they might have played an active role in certain types of criminal investigations. Whatever the truth, it's clear that cats were seen as more than just pets. Picture this: the court is in session, the air heavy with anticipation. The accused stands before the judge, awaiting judgment. But, instead of the judge's gavel striking the final blow, it's the cat in the corner of the room that holds the power. It watches intently, its eyes unblinking, focusing on the accused with such intensity that it almost feels like the cat is reading the defendant's soul. This wasn't just a cute pet lounging around, this was a divine figure watching over the trial. Imagine the dramatic silence as the cat shifts in its spot, and suddenly, the decision is made. The culprit is found guilty, or perhaps innocent, based on nothing but the cat's gaze. Some records even suggest that cats might have been involved in examining crime scenes, where their movements, behavior, or reactions were interpreted as clues to the truth. Did a cat recoil from a particular person? Did it stay away from a certain object? These seemingly simple gestures were thought to be signs of guilt, and the Egyptians believed that the divine nature of their cats could unveil the truth in even the most complicated cases. Now, if you're imagining this scene in your head, it's almost comical, right? The serious atmosphere of a courtroom, filled with people in their fine linen robes, only to have a cat walk in and claim the final say. It sounds like the stuff of myth, doesn't it? And yet, these beliefs were taken seriously in ancient Egyptian culture. In fact, the Egyptians' deep trust in the divine abilities of their cats meant that even something as trivial as a household dispute could have consequences if it involved a cat. If you were caught harming one, for instance, the repercussions could be severe. In the Egyptian mindset, it wasn't just about the crime you committed, it was about the cosmic balance you disrupted by disrespecting an animal that had the ear of the gods. Historians still debate whether or not cats were actually involved in formal legal procedures, or whether their role was more about maintaining order through their symbolic presence. Some suggest that the mere presence of a cat could have had a calming effect on the courtroom, creating an atmosphere of divine judgment, even if the cats weren't actively participating in the case itself. Yet, there's another theory that suggests the cat's role was far more interactive. Could the ancient Egyptians have trusted these creatures to make decisions in cases of extreme importance? Or were they merely symbols, used to amplify the gravity of the trial? In any case, the belief in a cat's ability to sense guilt or innocence was a testament to the mystical influence these creatures held in the Egyptian world. As we move further into our exploration, remember that while much of what we know about the Egyptian legal system is based on records and artifacts, there's still so much we don't know about how deeply embedded these cats were in daily life, and in criminal investigations. We'll continue to delve into their symbolic power and the legal ramifications of harming a cat, as well as the growing importance of feline presence in the royal courtrooms of Egypt. By now, you're probably starting to think that the idea of cats holding court is something straight out of a strange historical fantasy novel. But, as we explore further, there's a surprising level of reality behind the way cats were integrated into Egyptian society, and it's even more unusual than you might expect. Cats weren't just confined to the elite halls of justice, they were deeply woven into the very fabric of Egyptian religious rituals and daily life. But how, exactly, did they contribute to the overall sense of order and peace in society? It wasn't just about them watching over crime scenes or lounging in courtrooms, they played an integral role in the legal and religious life of Egyptians, and their influence reached far beyond mere companionship. Let's turn our attention to something that will make you look at your own feline companions in a whole new light: the potential role of cats in solving serious crimes, particularly murders. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how could a cat possibly be involved in a murder investigation? Well, it wasn't exactly Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but the belief was that cats, with their keen senses and seemingly mysterious behavior, could somehow uncover the truth in ways that humans couldn't. If a crime, say, a murder, was committed, it was thought that the cat's reaction to certain aspects of the scene could indicate whether a person was guilty. Imagine a cat walking over to a particular area of the room, or perhaps sniffing around a weapon. This behavior was interpreted as the cat understanding the significance of the scene, as though it could detect subtle clues that would otherwise go unnoticed. Historians still argue whether this was a literal practice or just a metaphorical belief that took on a life of its own. But what's fascinating is that the Egyptians were not alone in thinking that animals could play a role in uncovering the truth. There are accounts from other ancient cultures, such as the Greeks and Romans, where animals, like dogs, were believed to have similar abilities to detect guilt. But in Egypt, it was the cats who were at the forefront of this mystical detective work. Imagine being in a darkened room, a murder having just taken place, and the only thing left to do is to wait for the cat to come and provide its divine input. It's like a mystery novel where the cat is the key to the puzzle, a quiet and unassuming creature that sees more than anyone else. Now, let's not get too carried away with the idea of a cat actually solving crimes in the traditional sense. The more likely scenario is that cats, due to their symbolic and divine connection to the goddess Batet, were invoked during these investigations to ensure that justice was done. The belief was that cats brought a certain energy to the proceedings, a calm, all-knowing presence that somehow guided the outcome. Whether or not they were literally examining evidence, their role in ancient Egypt was deeply spiritual, and their presence alone was enough to instill a sense of divine judgment. But as we think about it, the role of the cat as a divine agent of justice is not only interesting from a historical standpoint, but it also raises some intriguing questions. What was it about the cat that made the ancient Egyptians believe in its power to detect guilt? Was it the cat's mysterious, almost otherworldly nature that made it an ideal companion for such sacred work? Or was it simply that, as creatures with sharp senses and independent behavior, cats were seen as the perfect balance between the human world and the divine? Historians continue to debate whether cats were actively involved in crime-solving or whether their symbolic importance was enough to serve as an unspoken judgment in these cases. As we move forward in this fascinating journey through ancient Egypt, we'll uncover more about how the laws surrounding cats played into their sacred role, including the severe consequences of harming one. But for now, let's savor the thought that in a courtroom somewhere in ancient Egypt, a single look from a cat could have decided someone's fate. Who would have thought that the next time you hear a cat meow, it could be a reminder of its centuries-old influence on justice? Now that we've explored how cats might have been involved in criminal justice, it's time to take a look at one of the most fascinating aspects of their legacy, the practice of mummifying cats. It's one of those things that sounds a little strange when you first hear it, right? I mean, we're all familiar with mummies, but the idea of mummifying animals, particularly cats, raises the question, why? Why go through the effort to preserve these animals for eternity? To answer this, we have to take a deeper dive into the spiritual and religious significance of cats in ancient Egypt, and how their role in the afterlife played a part in their mummification. In the grand scheme of Egyptian beliefs, the afterlife was incredibly important. It wasn't just about surviving death, it was about ensuring that you had everything you needed to live on for eternity. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul needed guidance and protection on its journey to the afterlife, and they placed great emphasis on what accompanied the soul after death. This is where cats come in. Since they were seen as sacred creatures connected to the goddess Batet, it was believed that they would offer divine protection to the souls of the departed. By mummifying cats and burying them with their owners, Egyptians were ensuring that their loved ones were accompanied by a divine protector in the afterlife. But the mummification of cats wasn't just limited to the elite. It wasn't uncommon for even the most humble of homes to have a cat or two mummified after death, sometimes with elaborate burial rites. Imagine a cat, its body carefully preserved, wrapped in linen and adorned with jewels or other offerings. Some mummies were placed inside small stone coffins, while others were buried in cat cemeteries, massive sites filled with the remains of thousands of cats. And these weren't just random animals. Many of these cats were thought to have been specially chosen for their roles in the afterlife, selected for their sacred connection to Batet. Interestingly, the process of mummifying cats wasn't always as simple as it seems. Historians believe that certain cats, especially those mummified with more care and attention, may have been considered especially holy. These cats were likely treated with the utmost reverence and were possibly seen as direct manifestations of Batet herself. It wasn't just about preserving the body, it was about ensuring that the cat could accompany its owner in the afterlife, serving as a guide or protector in the realm beyond. Some mummified cats were even found with inscriptions on their coffins that identified them as sacred beings, offering further proof of their elevated status. But there's another angle to consider when it comes to the mummification of cats, the practical side of this religious practice. For one, the Egyptians weren't just mummifying cats for spiritual reasons, there was also a sense of societal duty. The killing of a cat, whether accidentally or intentionally, could bring about severe consequences. But mummifying and honoring them after their death allowed Egyptians to demonstrate their respect for the animal, while also preserving its role in the afterlife. It was an act of devotion, both to the gods and to the animal itself. Of course, as with many ancient practices, historians still debate the true motivation behind mummifying cats. Some suggest that it was a way to ensure that the deceased were protected, while others believe it was a way to honor Batet and guarantee her continued favor. Either way, the practice of mummifying cats became so widespread that archaeologists have uncovered cat cemeteries with thousands of mummified cats, an incredible testament to how central these animals were to ancient Egyptian life and death. Now, as you picture the mummified cats, lying silently in their tombs, surrounded by offerings of food, jewelry, and sacred symbols, imagine how this practice must have been perceived in Egyptian society. To them, this was a deeply spiritual act, one that connected them to their gods and ensured their eternal protection. Perhaps the next time you see a cat lounging lazily in the sun, you'll have a deeper appreciation for the ancient beliefs that elevated these creatures to divine status, enough so that they would accompany their human counterparts into the afterlife. As we continue our journey through ancient Egypt, let's shift our focus to another fascinating aspect of the cat's role in Egyptian culture, their symbolic presence in the afterlife. Cats weren't just guardians in life, they were believed to play a crucial part in the journey of the soul after death. In ancient Egyptian religion, the afterlife was a complicated and sacred journey, one where every element, every ritual and object, had a specific purpose to ensure a smooth transition from this world to the next. Cats, with their divine connection to Batet, were seen as the perfect companions to accompany souls on this journey. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife wasn't just a destination, it was an ongoing journey. The deceased had to navigate through a series of challenges and obstacles, including crossing a dangerous underworld, facing judgment, and ensuring they were granted access to the divine realms. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed protection and guidance to pass through these trials. And who better to provide that protection than the cats, who were not only associated with the goddess of protection, Batet, but were also thought to embody the very essence of divine grace and strength? Cats were believed to be able to ward off evil spirits and ensure that the souls of the deceased remained safe throughout their journey. One of the most intriguing aspects of this belief was that cats were often depicted in the tombs of the deceased, sometimes in elaborate scenes showing them guiding the soul of the dead to the afterlife. Imagine a fresco on the wall of an ancient tomb, where a cat leads the soul of its departed owner through a beautiful, yet perilous landscape. The cat's role wasn't just as a passive observer, it was an active participant in the spiritual journey, ensuring that the soul reached its final destination. The Egyptians believed that cats could see the hidden world of spirits, just as they could detect danger in the physical world, and their presence in the tombs was meant to provide a comforting and protective influence. But how exactly did cats guide the soul? Historians and Egyptologists are still piecing together the mysteries of the Egyptian afterlife, and the role of animals, particularly cats, remains one of the most fascinating aspects of this research. While we can't say with certainty how exactly cats were thought to aid the souls of the dead, there are strong indications that they were regarded as spiritual guides who helped the deceased navigate through challenges in the afterlife. In some cases, it was believed that the cat's presence in the tomb would ensure that the deceased would be granted favor by the gods, particularly Batet herself. Their divine connection was seen as a way to ensure that the soul was welcomed into the next life with the protection it needed. Interestingly, this belief was not limited to the wealthiest or most powerful Egyptians. Even ordinary families would make offerings to their deceased cats, hoping to ensure that their beloved pets would provide them with the same protection and guidance. It wasn't uncommon for people to place small statues of cats in tombs, hoping that these figures would act as spiritual proxies for their real-life companions. As a result, cats were not just protectors of the living, they were also protectors of the dead, ensuring that both the living and the deceased were kept under the watchful eye of the divine. As we consider the role of cats in the afterlife, we begin to realize just how deeply ingrained they were in the spiritual and daily lives of the ancient Egyptians. They were more than just animals, they were sacred creatures, revered for their ability to protect, guide, and provide divine favor. In death, just as in life, they remained central figures in Egyptian belief, continuing their role as protectors and guides. And the ancient Egyptians, with their deep reverence for the afterlife, ensured that their cats would always have a place by their side. Picture yourself in a dark, candlelit tomb, the air thick with incense and the faint hum of sacred chants. In the distance, a cat's eyes gleam in the shadows, its presence a silent protector for the soul that rests here. The cat watches over the tomb, guarding it with the divine power that was believed to have come from the gods themselves. As the soul embarks on its journey to the afterlife, the cat is there, always watching, always guiding. It's a powerful image, isn't it? One that encapsulates the deep, spiritual bond between the Egyptians and their feline companions. By now, we've seen how deeply cats were woven into both the afterlife and justice system of ancient Egypt, but let's take a moment to explore their role in Egyptian courtrooms. Yes, you heard that right. Cats were believed to be present in legal proceedings, acting as a divine witness, silently influencing the outcome of trials. While this might sound like something from a fantasy, the truth is, in ancient Egypt, the belief in divine intervention was so strong that even cats, as sacred beings, were incorporated into the judicial process. The mere presence of a cat in a courtroom was seen as a way to guarantee fairness and righteousness in the eyes of the gods. Imagine being in a bustling Egyptian courtroom, the crowd murmuring as a trial is about to begin. You've got all the usual suspects, the judge, the accused, the witnesses, and, of course, the cat. The cat doesn't have a role to play in terms of legal representation or evidence presentation. It's simply there, perched in the corner or strolling through the room, its presence alone enough to assure everyone that the proceedings are under the watchful eye of Batet. Cats, being associated with the goddess of justice and protection, were thought to have the divine ability to discern truth from falsehood. So, when it came time to judge a person's fate, the cat's behavior might have been closely watched, as any movement or reaction could be interpreted as a sign of innocence or guilt. This belief wasn't just symbolic. Some records suggest that the courtrooms themselves were designed with the cat's presence in mind. Cats might have been invited to sit alongside the judge, as their gaze and behavior were believed to have the power to influence the trial's outcome. Historians still argue whether cats were an actual part of the legal process or if their role was purely ceremonial, but the idea that cats could somehow impact the legal system speaks volumes about how deeply Egyptians viewed their connection with the divine. Imagine a judge making their ruling not based solely on evidence and testimony, but also on the way the cat reacted to the defendant. Did the cat take an interest in the accused? Did it sit silently in a position of observation, watching intently? This idea, while seemingly strange, was not so far-fetched in a culture where the line between the divine and the earthly was often blurred. It's easy to dismiss this as superstition, but it's important to understand that in ancient Egypt, the divine realm was present in every facet of life, from the way people interacted with each other to the decisions made in the courtroom. The cat, as a sacred creature, was seen as an intermediary between the mortal world and the gods. Its judgment, no matter how subtle or unnoticed, was thought to carry the weight of divine intervention. In fact, some scholars suggest that cats were used in this way to reinforce the notion of fairness and impartiality in the court system. After all, if a crime was judged by a divine being, who better than a cat, an animal closely associated with Batet, the goddess of justice? So, imagine you're in the courtroom, watching as the trial unfolds. The cat, calm and composed, surveys the room, its sharp eyes observing every movement. The judge speaks, the accused stands before them, and the witnesses give their testimony. But it's the cat who is the true witness to the scene. Its presence is a reminder that this trial is not just about human judgment, it's about ensuring that divine justice prevails. Perhaps, when the verdict is given, you'll catch the cat's eyes flicker in a certain direction, signaling that the judgment is true. Or maybe it will remain perfectly still, conveying that the truth has been found, and no further actions are necessary. In any case, the idea that a cat could play such a pivotal role in the courtroom is a testament to the reverence the Egyptians had for these creatures. Whether the cats were actively involved in decision-making or simply acting as divine witnesses, their role in the courtroom was a powerful symbol of the connection between law, justice, and the gods. It was another way that cats, as sacred beings, influenced Egyptian society, shaping the very systems that governed life and death. It's a fascinating and somewhat whimsical idea to think about, cats as both protectors and judges, sitting in on trials and silently guiding the fate of those who stood before them. Now that we've covered the role of cats in the courtroom, let's shift gears and dive into one of the more peculiar aspects of ancient Egyptian life, the strict laws surrounding the treatment of cats. In Egypt, cats weren't just beloved companions, they were so highly revered that they were protected by some of the strictest laws of the time. Harm a cat, and you could be in serious trouble, facing dire consequences that would make even the most hardened criminals think twice. These laws weren't just about keeping order in society, they were about maintaining the cosmic balance between humans and the divine, particularly the relationship between humans and Batet, the goddess of cats. Let's imagine a scenario. You're living in an ancient Egyptian city, minding your own business, when you happen to overhear a loud commotion coming from a nearby home. You walk over to find a neighbor, who's in a heated argument with their family, having just accidentally hurt their cat. The family is in a panic, fearing the consequences of this accident, and with good reason. Under Egyptian law, harming a cat, whether it was intentional or accidental, could result in severe punishment, including death. That's right, the penalty for hurting or killing a cat could be as extreme as losing your life. It might sound absurd to us today, but for the ancient Egyptians, it made perfect sense. Cats were seen as direct embodiments of Batet, and therefore, attacking one was seen as an affront to the gods themselves. Historians still debate whether these laws were actually enforced to the extreme, or if the threat of such harsh penalties was enough to deter people from harming cats. The ancient records suggest that the protection of cats was taken so seriously that even pharaohs issued decrees to protect them. This included making it illegal to harm a cat, steal one, or even export them from Egypt. Cats, as sacred creatures, were considered too important to be treated as mere animals, and anyone who disrespected them was seen as committing a crime not just against society, but against the divine order. In fact, many ancient Egyptians believed that the fate of the nation depended on their respect for the sacred animals, including cats. If the cats were disrespected or harmed, it was thought that disaster would befall the nation. This belief was rooted in the idea that the gods, particularly Batet, would punish those who dared to harm her sacred creatures. Interestingly, these laws surrounding the protection of cats were so strict that they extended even to the royal family. The pharaoh, despite his power, could not harm a cat without facing divine retribution. There are stories of royal households that would go to great lengths to protect their feline companions, treating them with the utmost care and reverence. Cats were even granted a special status in society, and their owners were often seen as the guardians of these divine creatures. It was a status symbol of sorts, to have a well-cared-for cat under your roof, especially if you could afford the elaborate mummification process for your feline companion after death. But what about the cats themselves? Were they aware of the special treatment they received? Probably not in the way we understand it today, but there's no denying that ancient Egyptians treated their cats with a level of reverence that was reserved for the most sacred of creatures. And cats, being the independent and mysterious animals they are, probably didn't mind one bit. They'd strut through homes, courts, and temples with an air of superiority, knowing full well that they were protected by the laws of Egypt, and, more importantly, by the gods themselves. Now, imagine living in a time when the fate of your nation and your place in society could depend on your relationship with a cat. The stakes would be high, and the idea of breaking one of these sacred laws, whether intentionally or accidentally, would be a terrifying thought. As you walk through the streets of ancient Egypt, you can almost picture the solemn respect people had for the cats around them. They were more than just pets. They were divine creatures, protectors of homes, keepers of secrets, and even silent judges in the courtrooms. To harm them was to challenge the very balance of the universe, and that was a crime that no one, not even the pharaoh, would dare commit. As we continue this journey through the fascinating and sometimes strange world of ancient Egypt, let's now focus on the enduring relationship between the royal family and their cats. You might think that the pharaohs, the most powerful figures in Egypt, could have any pet they wanted, or even no pets at all, but the truth is, the royal family treated their cats with the same reverence that was afforded to the gods. Cats were not just symbols of protection and divinity, they were part of the royal court, and their presence carried significant weight in the eyes of the public and the divine. Imagine walking through the halls of a grand Egyptian palace, the scent of incense lingering in the air, and as you pass by a large ornate chamber, you catch sight of the royal family's prized feline companion. This wasn't just any cat, it was the pharaoh's cat, revered and treated with the utmost care. The royal household wouldn't just keep cats as pets, they would have them revered as sacred beings, often placing them in ceremonial roles and ensuring their safety above all else. The cats were often housed in lavish surroundings, complete with plush beds, fine food, and a dedicated servant or two to cater to their every whim. In the royal courts, cats were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, particularly the goddess Batet, who was both a protector and a warrior. These cats were not mere creatures, they were divine symbols, living manifestations of the goddess's power. Historians still debate how much influence the royal cats had on the actual political affairs of Egypt, but there's no question that they held great symbolic importance. The royal family's relationship with these cats was built on both a spiritual connection and a desire for public prestige. Cats were a symbol of power and protection, and by keeping them in the palace, the pharaohs reinforced their divine right to rule. It wasn't just about adoration of a beloved pet, it was about aligning oneself with the gods. Bastet's protection, in the form of her sacred feline companions, was seen as a way to ensure the stability and prosperity of the royal reign. This royal connection with cats was so strong that when a cat died, the mourning process was nothing short of grand. In the same way that the death of a pharaoh would be marked by elaborate funeral rites and mummification, the royal cats were also honored in death. Many royal cats were mummified and buried with great ceremony, ensuring that they had an honorable passage to the afterlife. Their bodies were preserved with the same care and respect that would be given to any important figure in Egyptian society. The mummification of these royal cats wasn't just a sign of respect, it was a sign of their divine status. These animals weren't just companions, they were gods in disguise, and their passing required the same rites as those reserved for the most revered figures in Egyptian culture. Even the common people of Egypt, who might not have had access to the royal courts or the elaborate mummification rituals, still looked to the royal treatment of cats as a model of how to treat these sacred animals. The reverence shown to royal cats had a trickle-down effect, leading to the practice of mummifying and burying cats in all levels of society. A cat's death, whether royal or not, was treated with the utmost respect and reverence, and to harm one was to invoke the wrath of the gods. The royal treatment of cats thus reinforced their divine status, ensuring that the image of the cat as a sacred protector and guide to the afterlife was firmly cemented in the Egyptian consciousness. Now, picture yourself standing in one of the royal tombs of ancient Egypt. The air is thick with incense, and in the corner, you spot a beautifully mummified cat, carefully wrapped and adorned with jewels. This cat, once the cherished companion of the pharaoh, now lies in eternal rest, its divine connection to Batet preserved for all eternity. The reverence shown to these royal cats speaks volumes about the way ancient Egyptians viewed their feline companions, not just as pets, but as sacred creatures with the power to protect, guide, and ensure divine favor. As we reflect on the royal role of cats in Egypt, it becomes clear that they were far more than just symbols of protection. They were essential to the very fabric of Egyptian religious and political life, their presence a constant reminder of the connection between the mortal and the divine. The royal family's devotion to their cats solidified the idea that these creatures were to be revered, worshipped, and protected at all costs. As we move forward, it's time to explore the laws that governed the treatment of cats in ancient Egypt and how these laws affected not just everyday Egyptians but also the broader social and religious landscape. As we've already seen, cats were seen as sacred creatures, embodiments of Batet herself, and as such, they were granted a level of protection and reverence that went far beyond what we might expect for ordinary animals. The laws surrounding the treatment of cats were so strict that the consequences for harming, killing, or even stealing a cat were severe, often resulting in the harshest penalties, including death. The concept of law in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with the divine. Laws were seen as direct extensions of the will of the gods, and those who violated them were considered to have offended the gods themselves. This was especially true when it came to the laws surrounding the treatment of sacred animals like cats. The idea was that by harming a cat, you were not just offending a pet or a beloved animal, you were insulting the very gods. And that was a crime that no one could escape unscathed. Historians still debate the exact nature of the punishment for harming a cat, but the consensus is that it was severe, reflecting the deep reverence Egyptians had for these creatures. Imagine, then, living in a time when even a simple mistake, perhaps accidentally stepping on a cat's tail or causing harm to one in a fit of frustration, could lead to severe consequences. The Egyptians, however, didn't just punish the harm of cats out of love for the animals. It was also about maintaining divine order. The cats were seen as sacred mediators between the human world and the gods. To harm a cat was to upset the balance between the divine and the mortal, and such an act was believed to bring misfortune not just to the person who committed the crime, but to their entire community. The protection of cats, then, was not only a matter of individual respect but also a matter of public order. The laws governing the protection of cats were so significant that they permeated every level of society, from the most humble homes to the royal courts. In fact, the royal family's devotion to cats set an example for the entire nation. Pharaohs and their families were expected to care for and protect their cats with the utmost reverence, and any violation of these sacred animals' rights was considered a grave offense. Interestingly, this respect wasn't just limited to the lives of the cats themselves. The ancient Egyptians also believed that cats held the power to bring blessings, good fortune, and protection to the household. Their presence was seen as a safeguard, ensuring that the household was under the protection of Batet and that no harm could come to the family within. It's easy to see how such a belief would influence laws surrounding the treatment of cats and how the punishment for harming them was viewed as a reflection of the social importance of divine favor. But what happened if a person did break these laws? If someone killed a cat, or perhaps even stole one, the penalty could be severe. The record suggests that in some cases, the punishment for killing a cat was death, no exceptions. The idea was that the crime was so egregious that only the most extreme consequences could balance the cosmic scales. Similarly, stealing a cat could result in severe penalties, as it was not only a crime against the animal but a crime against the gods themselves. Some accounts suggest that even the theft of a cat could be punished by death, though it's unclear whether this was universally enforced. Regardless, the threat of such harsh penalties acted as a deterrent, ensuring that people respected the sacred status of these animals and adhered to the laws protecting them. So, picture yourself walking through the streets of ancient Egypt, where every step you take is surrounded by these sacred creatures. Cats stroll confidently through the marketplaces, resting on sun-warmed stones, their eyes keenly observing their surroundings. To harm or disrespect one of them would be unthinkable, as it was a direct offense to the gods. The fear of the laws surrounding the treatment of cats was so deeply ingrained that Egyptians were careful to avoid any actions that might invite divine retribution. It was a culture where the balance between the divine and the mortal was maintained through reverence for animals, particularly cats, who were seen as the earthly representatives of Batet. The laws governing cats were not just about justice in the conventional sense, they were about ensuring that Egypt's connection to the divine remained intact. And as we continue exploring this fascinating world, we'll see just how far the influence of these sacred laws extended, even beyond the lives of the animals themselves. Now that we've explored the laws surrounding the protection of cats in ancient Egypt, let's shift gears and delve into the fascinating shift in attitudes toward cats over time. While we've seen how deeply ingrained the reverence for cats was in early Egyptian society, this level of devotion didn't last forever. The power and influence of cats began to wane, especially after the decline of the New Kingdom and the eventual fall of Egypt to foreign invaders. As Egypt transitioned through various dynasties, the role of cats, and the divine connection they held with Batet, started to evolve. But what caused this shift? And how did the status of cats change as Egypt itself began to change? Let's start by imagining the scene. It's the beginning of the late period, and Egypt is no longer the same powerful kingdom it once was. Foreign rulers, including the Persians and eventually the Greeks under Alexander the Great, had begun to exert control over the region. As Egypt's political landscape shifted, so too did its religious and cultural practices. The once sacred status of cats was no longer universally accepted, and their role in the society began to change. The new rulers, while respecting Egyptian culture to some extent, introduced their own beliefs and practices, which often clashed with the deeply ingrained Egyptian reverence for cats. At this point in history, the divine role that cats once held began to lose its place in the political and religious life of Egypt. The rise of new gods and new ways of thinking gradually diminished the sacred status of cats, and as Egypt came under foreign rule, the once sacred animals were no longer regarded with the same divine reverence. Instead of being seen as divine protectors and sacred beings, cats started to be viewed more as ordinary animals, companions, sure, but no longer creatures of great spiritual power. Historians still debate the reasons behind this shift, with some suggesting that the changes in Egypt's political and religious landscape played a significant role. The introduction of new rulers and foreign religious influences likely led to the decline in the worship of Egyptian gods, including Batet. As a result, the cats that had once symbolized the divine protection of the goddess were no longer seen as powerful agents of justice and protection, but instead became regular household pets or even occasional nuisances in some regions. This change wasn't just about cats losing their divine status, though. It was also about the broader transformation of Egyptian society. As Egypt became part of larger empires and cultures, the traditional beliefs that had once defined Egyptian culture slowly began to give way to new ideas. The rise of Hellenistic and later Roman influences further diminished the religious importance of cats, although they remained popular as pets and symbols of beauty and grace in these new cultures. The cats of Egypt no longer held the same position of divine power they once had, but they continued to be beloved by many. However, despite the decline in their religious status, cats still retained a certain charm and appeal. In fact, as Egyptian culture blended with Greek and Roman influences, the legacy of cats as symbols of mystery, independence, and protection persisted in the broader Mediterranean world. The Greeks and Romans took a liking to cats and treated them as symbols of domestic tranquility, but the divine power that once accompanied the cat in Egypt was lost. In a way, The decline of the cat's religious status was a result of Egypt's broader cultural transformation, one that was marked by the loss of the old gods and the introduction of new religious systems. It's fascinating to think about the cats that once commanded such power, walking proudly through the royal palaces of Egypt, now reduced to mere pets in foreign lands. The gods of Egypt had moved on, and with them, the sacredness of their feline companions. Yet, despite this shift, the cat's connection to Egypt's glorious past remained intact. The symbols of Batet, the cat-headed goddess, could still be found in many places, even as Egypt's ancient grandeur faded into the past. So, imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient Egyptian city. The once great temples and palaces are now crumbling, and the magnificent statues of Batet, once proudly displayed in every corner, now lie in pieces. But amidst this decay, the presence of cats persists. They wander the streets, the remnants of a once sacred lineage, now living as symbols of a time long gone. Their silent, graceful movements serve as a reminder of the divine connection they once held with the gods, even if the world around them has changed. The fall of Egypt's empire might have changed the role of cats, but their legacy lived on, echoing through time as an enduring symbol of mystery, protection, and divine grace. As we continue exploring the history of cats in Egypt, let's take a closer look at their role in later periods, especially during the Ptolemaic dynasty. While Egypt's political and religious landscape may have changed dramatically after the fall of the native pharaohs, the Ptolemies, Greek rulers who took control of Egypt after Alexander the Great, had a unique relationship with the country's culture and traditions. Interestingly, even though they were foreign rulers, the Ptolemies were quite adept at blending Greek and Egyptian traditions. This blending allowed them to maintain some of Egypt's cultural practices, including the veneration of cats, but with a slightly different twist. Picture yourself walking through Alexandria, the great city founded by Alexander the Great himself, in the height of the Ptolemaic period. You pass by grand columns and statues, some representing the Greek gods, others echoing the ancient Egyptian deities. And there, amidst the melting pot of cultural influences, you find statues of cats. While the Ptolemies didn't worship Batet in the same way the Egyptians once did, they respected the powerful symbolism of cats and incorporated them into their public life. Cats still held a certain mystique, serving as symbols of grace, beauty, and protection. But they had also taken on new meanings in this evolving culture. The Ptolemies weren't alone in their interest in cats. The Greeks, who had a long history of domesticating cats, admired the Egyptian reverence for the feline creatures, and some even saw them as a link to Egypt's glorious past. Cats, once seen as divine beings in Egyptian temples, were now respected as pets by the elite in Alexandria and other Ptolemaic cities. In some cases, they were even associated with the Greek goddess Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and protector of animals, due to the similar qualities between the two figures. Cats were now viewed not just as divine creatures, but also as symbols of aristocratic sophistication and status. In this new era, they became part of the cultural exchange between Greece and Egypt, embodying the shared appreciation for beauty and grace in both cultures. But the blending of Greek and Egyptian beliefs didn't stop there. It's important to note that during the Ptolemaic period, the role of cats shifted from sacred protectors to symbols of domesticity and high status. While the reverence for Batet remained in the hearts of many Egyptians, cats in the Ptolemaic era were largely appreciated for their more practical role as companions. They were also seen as symbols of the ideal home, appearing in artwork and pottery that depicted domestic scenes of prosperity and tranquility. The godlike status that cats once held had faded somewhat, but they were still cherished in a new, more secular way. However, it's interesting to think about how these changes would have affected the common Egyptian citizen. While the Ptolemaic rulers might have been open to the more domestic role of cats, the traditional Egyptians, who had once relied on cats as protectors and divine guides, might have felt a sense of loss. The once sacred status of cats had been replaced with a more mundane view of them as pets or household fixtures. Despite this shift, though, cats continued to be beloved throughout Egypt, even if their divine connection was no longer as widely acknowledged. This was a time of great transition, and the role of cats, like many aspects of Egyptian culture, was caught between the old world and the new. In this period, as Egypt's gods became more symbolic and less central to everyday life, cats retained a strong presence in homes, temples, and royal courts. The Ptolemies, with their ability to combine the best of Greek and Egyptian traditions, ensured that cats were still a part of Egypt's cultural identity. They were no longer the divine judges or protectors of the afterlife, but they remained a symbol of Egypt's ancient glory. And as the Ptolemies sought to reconcile Egypt's past with their own rule, cats served as a quiet reminder of the country's rich history and religious significance. So, picture yourself in Alexandria once more, walking down a busy street. The sun casts a warm glow over the city, and in the bustling market, you see cats lounging lazily in the sun, their sleek fur glistening in the light. Though they no longer serve as divine agents or the protectors of the afterlife, their presence still carries a sense of quiet dignity. Their mysterious eyes and graceful movements remind you of a time when they were revered as gods themselves. Even though their role had changed, cats continued to be a symbol of Egypt's beauty, grace, and enduring legacy. As we reach the final chapters of our journey through ancient Egypt and its relationship with cats, let's explore how, even after the fall of the ancient Egyptian empire, cats continued to play a role in the cultural memory of Egypt. While the political influence of Egypt diminished, the reverence for cats endured. Over time, Egypt became a part of various empires, first the Romans, then the Arabs, but the legacy of cats, particularly their divine association with Batet, continued to resonate. Even as Egypt's political landscape transformed, cats remained cherished symbols, albeit in different forms, across cultures that succeeded the Egyptians. The Romans, in particular, were fascinated by the cats they encountered in Egypt. Cats had been introduced to Rome during the Roman Empire's expansion, and they were quickly adopted as pets, admired for their grace and beauty. While the Romans didn't see them as sacred creatures like the Egyptians, the mystique of the cat remained. Cats were still admired for their ability to protect food stores from vermin, but they were also beloved for their serene and independent personalities. Roman artwork from this period often depicts cats lounging comfortably in Roman villas, a far cry from their divine role in Egyptian temples. However, in the context of the Roman world, cats retained an air of elegance and were considered symbols of the refined lifestyle, much like they had been in Egypt. In the years following the Roman Empire, when Christianity began to spread across Egypt and the ancient gods were increasingly abandoned, the symbolic role of cats took on a new dimension. Christianity, with its monotheistic beliefs, did not hold the same reverence for animals as did the ancient Egyptian religion. Still, the image of the cat, particularly as a symbol of grace and beauty, survived in various folk traditions, including some within the church. In some places, cats were seen as protectors of the home, though they were no longer viewed as direct intermediaries between the gods and humanity. They had become secular companions rather than divine guardians. However, the association of cats with Egypt continued to linger, even as the direct connection to the goddess Batet faded. During the Middle Ages, in Europe, the Egyptian image of the cat persisted through folklore. Cats, often seen as mysterious and magical animals, were linked with various superstitions. Some cultures saw them as protectors of the home, while others associated them with witchcraft and the occult. This shift in perception was a far cry from their revered status in Egypt, but it reflected the lingering aura of mystery that surrounded these animals. In this new context, cats were still seen as powerful symbols, perhaps of both the light and dark sides of human belief. Despite these shifts, the cultural memory of Egypt's sacred cats did not vanish completely. It would take many centuries for the connection between Egypt and its cats to fade entirely. Throughout medieval and early modern Europe, images of the sacred cat were often intertwined with representations of Egyptian culture. Pharaohs, gods, and mystical symbols from Egypt would appear in art, literature, and even in the decorations of wealthy homes, where cats still held a place of affection and importance, though no longer as divine beings. They had become symbols of a lost world, a time when they were more than mere pets and when they shared the heavens with gods and pharaohs. This final chapter of the cat's journey through Egypt, and later through the broader world, reflects the lasting power of the feline figure. While cats may have lost their direct connection to the Egyptian gods, they continued to embody the qualities that made them so revered in the first place: mystery, grace, protection, and independence. Cats became more than just animals. They became living symbols of ancient Egypt, of a time when gods walked the earth and when the sacred and the mortal were intertwined in ways that we can only begin to understand today. So, as you picture these cats, walking silently through the streets of Alexandria or lounging in the homes of Roman elites, remember that their journey has spanned thousands of years. From divine protectors to regal companions, their story mirrors the rise and fall of one of the most fascinating civilizations in history. Cats, in their quiet, unassuming way, have been present at the heart of Egypt's most sacred rituals, and even today, they continue to serve as silent witnesses to the passage of time, reminding us of a world that once revered them as gods. As we come to the final leg of our journey through the mysterious, enchanting world of cats in ancient Egypt, let's take a moment to wind down and reflect on just how extraordinary these animals were. Throughout our exploration, we've seen how cats transition from sacred guardians, divine companions of gods, and symbols of protection, to beloved pets that continue to grace our homes with their presence today. Their journey, though rooted in the ancient past, reverberates through time, leaving an indelible mark on cultures far beyond Egypt. Even as the political and religious influence of Egypt waned, the image of the cat persisted, continuing to captivate the hearts of people around the world. Now, as the night deepens and we think about the ancient Egyptians' profound connection to these feline creatures, we can't help but acknowledge the unique role cats play in our own lives today. Although they no longer wield divine power, cats still have a certain magic about them, don't they? They stroll through our homes with that same regal grace, casting a knowing glance here and there, as if still in touch with their ancient ancestors. Their eyes, still sharp and perceptive, seem to look beyond us, as if they're seeing something we can't. Perhaps, deep down, they still carry a trace of the mystery and majesty they once had in the courts of pharaohs, or in the sacred temples of Batet. As we slowly drift towards the end of our story tonight, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of the Egyptian cats. They were more than just animals. They were, in many ways, a bridge between the human world and the divine. They were protectors, guides, and guardians of not just the home but also of the sacred order that governed both life and death in ancient Egypt. They stood as silent witnesses to crimes, as divine figures in courtrooms, and as guides to the afterlife. And in doing so, they became an integral part of the Egyptian worldview, embodying the connection between the earthly and the divine. But beyond the grandeur of their role in Egyptian society, there's something deeply personal about the relationship between humans and cats. Just as the Egyptians felt that their cats were divine companions, many of us today find comfort in the quiet companionship of our feline friends. Cats don't need to speak to us in words. they communicate in a language all their own, one that we've learned to understand over centuries of cohabitation. Whether they're curling up in your lap or giving you that look of quiet judgment, cats have an uncanny ability to make us feel understood, even without saying a word. In many ways, they continue to fulfill the same role they played in ancient Egypt: guardians, protectors, and keepers of a gentle, mysterious grace that transcends time. As we close tonight's story, let the peaceful image of an ancient Egyptian cat accompany you into a restful sleep. Perhaps, as you drift off, you might even feel as if one of these sacred creatures is watching over you, guarding your dreams just as they once guarded the homes and hearts of Egypt. The cats of Egypt may have long since faded from the temples and courts, but their spirit remains, ever present, ever watchful, and ever a part of the magical world they once inhabited. Now, as the last whispers of the ancient world fade into the background, allow yourself to relax, to embrace the quiet warmth of your own space, and to fall into a peaceful slumber. The story of Egypt's sacred cats may have ended, but the power and mystery they embodied live on, quietly watching, ever vigilant.